I was the kind of person who would rather be in a lower level of class and get an A than be in a higher level of class and get a B, because I couldn't handle the idea of not being the smartest kid in the room.
Emily Armstrong usually was the smartest kid in the room. She was labeled gifted in the 3rd grade, which she says trapped her between two extremes.
How that affected me was I did vacillate between thinking I was fantastic and then having tremendous anxiety when I didn't live up to my own expectations.
Emily says the pressure she felt was self-imposed.
I think it was a measure of value. How valuable am I to society? How valuable am I to the people around me? I have to be this way so that I will be loved and appreciated and cared for.
Out of those beliefs grew a need for academic perfection. By high school, Emily also craved some kind of framework for life and explored religion. She discovered the Baha'i faith in college, which fit into her view of how things should be.
The idea of having a one world order, a one world universal language, one world religion, and one world government, it seemed perfect.
But trying to keep all the rules showed her she wasn't perfect.
The longer I was a Baha'i, I found out, oh, apparently we're supposed to do ceremonial hand washing. We're supposed to be doing ablutions. I don't know how to do that. And particularly when Aaron came along, that whole chastity thing went out the window. And that was another thing I wasn't good at. I tried to keep this idea in my head that, I was this awesome, smart, amazing person, and that wasn't lining up with reality, and that was starting to be really hard for me.
Emily felt like a failure, so she gave up on Baha'i and moved in with Aaron.
I just wanted to be with my boyfriend and have fun in college, and I just wanted to not care anymore about being perfect.
I wasn't interested in anything to do with religion or God or spirituality.
A few years later, a friend invited them to a Christian discussion group called Alpha. They went solely for the free food.
After those 10 weeks, we went, well, that's great for them. Good for you guys. Thank you for sharing.
Still, the course made Emily think about eternity.
I was starting to get the concept of Jesus's sacrifice and what that means, and the idea that, no, I'm actually not good enough to get into heaven on my own.
Aaron got nothing out of the course, but wanted to poke holes in his Christian friends' beliefs, so he bought a Bible.
The Jesus that I saw there was nothing like any sort of caricature that I'd seen in any sort of media. A very passionate individual, a very authoritative individual. Is this guy telling the truth? And if so, what does that actually mean for me?
Emily decided to read it too.
Because he was doing it, I thought, okay, well, we can talk about it together. It'll be a fun intellectual exercise.
It was then they both noticed some strange things starting to happen.
I would get hang-up call after hang-up call after hang-up call. I would start to see shadows in the corner of my eye, as if someone was there and had just moved out of view. And I was starting to really be concerned about my mental health.
Over the next few weeks, it got worse. Aaron heard voices.
You're not his, he won't save you, you're ours, that kind of thing. I'd wake up actually with scratches in places that I couldn't have made them.
They were afraid, but didn't know what to do. One night, something woke them both.
It was like there was a thick blanket of evil in the room. He was half up off the bed, and it really did look like someone was lifting him up.
I actually felt myself fall down into my bed.
Which terrified them. Emily decided to pray for more than a rescue.
That's when I really started thinking about what we had learned in Alpha and the things in the Bible, what the Bible says about you can't get out of this on your own. I need Jesus because I can't be the awesome person that I thought that I could be. I realized that I was a sinner and there was no way I was going to get to heaven on my own. And then I waited to see what Aaron would do. It was a very, very long 12 seconds.
And it really was this moment where I had to admit, okay, Jesus, you are who you say you are. You are God, you are the creator of this universe. You are the ruler of this universe. I've been in rebellion against you, and I need to repent of that and forgive me for that, and please save me from all of this.
And he did save me. And that feeling lifted from me, that feeling of oppression.
Emily and Aaron soon found a church, got counseling from the pastor, and months later, married. 10 years and 3 children later, they're grateful that God showed them who He really is, and that only He can be perfect.
So ultimately, the thing that He has given me that I most needed is redemption and adoption into His family. And that is huge for me.
I have a peace that I didn't have before, and I know what is true. And I think that because I know that Christ is who He says He is, it makes the rest of the world make sense.
I instantly fell to my knees in front of Him. And I knew that I was falling in the presence of God.
Crystal McVeigh wasn't having a dream. She had died and says she woke up in heaven.
And it was this God that I had run from my whole life.
Her journey away from Him began when she was molested at 3 years old.
I grew up believing that I was disgusting and broken and filthy.
Crystal went to church with her mother. When she was 8, she accepted Christ and was baptized. She hoped that would cleanse her from the guilt and shame of being molested. But the abuse continued until she was 12 years old.
I decided that there were 2 options. Either one, there was a God and He didn't love me for whatever reason, because He hadn't stopped the things that had happened in my life, He hadn't saved me, or 2, there was no God.
In her teen years, Crystal started using drugs and alcohol and was promiscuous. By the time she was 21, Crystal was a divorced mother with 2 children. Finally, at 28, she settled down and married Virgil, and they had twins. 10 months later, in December 2009, doctors performed a routine procedure that triggered pancreatitis. She had complications and ended up with a 110-degree fever. Her mother, Bonnie, came to the hospital.
She didn't look right. She looked swollen to me. They had put her on a pain pump.
I felt very calm and very peaceful. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing my mom sit at the chair at the foot of my bed. And I told her that I loved her.
Mom, I love you.
She felt cold. And when I looked up, her lips were blue. And she wasn't breathing. And I turned around and her face was black. And I just started screaming, she's dead, she's dead. The nurse told me, she said, you need to leave, and I told her, I'm not going anywhere.
Code blue, we need the crash cart in here. Quick.
For the next 9 minutes, doctors and nurses tried to resuscitate Crystal. About that time, Crystal's husband Virgil arrived.
Everything went through my mind. I didn't know if she was alive. I didn't know if she was dead.
I know why they didn't want me in there. It's violent. And so her 9 minutes in heaven were my 9 minutes in hell.
While the team worked to revive her, Crystal says she was in heaven.
The first thing I remember becoming aware of was that I was still me. And I was still the me who had just told my mother that I loved her and died. And I was very aware of the fact that I had just died. But I was also the me that had existed from the moment that God had created me. The light came to me as if I was in the middle of the tunnel, yet it went on for eternity. I remember being so at peace and so bathed in this light and this love.
She knew she was in the presence of God.
I didn't see a face. I didn't see any features other than this beautiful light. And words like amazing and perfect and beautiful, they fall so drastically short. I could not get enough of Him. I could not breathe enough of Him in. I could not get close enough to the light, and the light was all over me.
Then, Crystal says she tried to ask God a question.
I wanted to know why He didn't love me, or why He lets bad things happen. And yet as I stood in front of Him and I faced Him and I fell to my knees and I raised my hands, the question I called out to Him was, why didn't I do more for you? Because in an instant, He revealed His true self to me, which is love. I had never truly worshiped God ever in my entire life, but I fell in front of Him and I worshiped Him. And as I lay there in worship and awe of this Creator. I remember saying I could worship you for eternity.
Crystal traveled with God down a tunnel toward the gates of heaven. She noticed a small child ahead of her.
She wore a bonnet on her head and she had a little white basket in her hand. I watched her pick her basket up and dip it in the light. She would scoop it and then she would dump the light out as if it was water. And the light would cascade out of her basket and she would throw her head back and she would laugh. And every time she laughed, every time she moved, my spirit began to swell as if it was a balloon with love.
God revealed to Crystal that she was seeing herself at 3 years old.
She was me at the moment that the enemy stepped into my life and whispered that I was worthless, that I was broken, that I was disgusting, that I got everything I deserved. She was the 3-year-old that heard that God didn't love her, that He had abandoned her, that He had forsaken her, and that God didn't exist. And He allowed me to know that He had allowed me to look through His eyes and to see the truth. And the truth set me free.
All of Crystal's doubts about the existence of God and His love for her faded away.
I remember what it felt like to be in chains. And I remember the moment that He took them from me. I was free, and He didn't just say, "Crystal, I love you." He allowed me to experience His love, and His love almost made me explode.
Then Crystal says she heard her mother calling her name.
And I said, "Can I go tell her that I'm okay?" And He said, "The choice is up to you." And I turned away from this light to go and find where her voice was coming from. And when I turned, He said, "Tell them what you can remember." And I remember calling back, "I'll remember everything, and I'll be right back." And I looked down through the floor of this tunnel of heaven, and it was as if I was looking at a million shimmering diamonds. And the instant that I noticed those diamond-like substances, I was back in my body.
Crystal woke up in the hospital surrounded by the medical team.
And I turned to my mom, who was crying, and I told her that I was in heaven, that I was with God, and that I was in the most beautiful light, and that I was okay.
Crystal left the hospital 8 days later. She'll tell you she left there a different person.
My life has completely changed. The person that died in that hospital room was not the same person who came back in so many different ways. But the difference is that I know that there is a God who loves us. I know that there is a Father who really is listening to us, who really is holding us.
Crystal has written about her journey in her New York Times best-selling book called Waking Up in Heaven.
People often ask me, "What is your message? What message did He send you back with?" And it is so simple that it just doesn't matter who we are, where we've been, what's been done to us, what we've done, that His love is so vast and so great that it encompasses everything. And that we have that love not for anything that we've done to deserve it, but because He finds us worthy and because He gives us the choice to choose Him.
Clear? Clear?
I felt like I was fading away. Next thing I knew, off in the distance, I saw white light.
Jim Anderson was dying from a massive heart attack. The only signs of trouble came a year earlier, but his doctor called the symptoms stress-related. Jim was working 12-hour days as a supervisor at a wastewater treatment plant. But this time, Jim knew it was much more than stress.
I was resting in my bedroom, and all of a sudden I had a crushing pain in my chest, and the pain radiated down the arm, up the side of the neck. Couldn't catch my breath. And I called to my daughter. I said, "You're gonna have to get me to the hospital. I'm not gonna make it."
A balloon catheter was inserted into his artery. He was stabilized and placed on a heart transplant list. But 2 days later, Jim flatlined.
I could see everyone rushing into the room, but I couldn't hear the alarms going off. It's like I had gone underwater. The hearing had just faded away. That's when I began to pray. I knew I was dying. It wasn't a scared praying. It was earnest to take care of my family. As I prayed, it got darker to the point it went black. Next thing I knew, off of this distance, I saw white light. It was beautiful. Just wasn't blinding, but pure, perfect. As I started to go towards the light, I could see the outer edge of it begin to spiral. And I couldn't figure out what that was, but as I got closer, I could see it was the words of prayers revolving. The words broke off, going into the light, and I followed into the light. The next thing I felt was being embraced, safe and secure. It felt wonderful. It felt like total love. Next thing I knew, I was looking down the room where my body was. I could see everyone working on me. I could hear what they were saying. There were 2 nurses outside of the room looking in. One said to the other, "Why are they working so hard? He's gone. If they do bring him back, he'll be a vegetable." I later on told her what she said. She about passed out. Then I thought to myself, "Where's Debbie?" And instantly I was in the room where she was.
And I'd just gotten finished with that prayer. He's yours, Lord, because I knew that was the only way he was coming back to us. God wanted him to.
When she did that,
He's yours.
I zoomed right in on her face.
He's yours.
When I saw her face, I saw every aspect of our life together. From the first day we met, our marriage, the birth of our children, all the emotions we've shared. I couldn't leave her. I just couldn't leave her. And I cried out to the Lord. I said, "Lord, I love you so much, but please let me go back." I said, "My wife needs me. My children need me so much. Please let me go back."
The doctors and nurses didn't give up. They shocked Jim so many times that the flesh on his chest was burned. Then, the doctors heard a heartbeat.
I came back to a world of pain. They shocked me so many times. It's like coming back out of the water. Just my hearing came back. I could hear them telling me, "I can't believe it, he's back, he's back." I said, "Can you hear me?" And I took that first breath on my own. Have you ever tasted honeysuckle? That's exactly what that first breath tasted like. It was so sweet, so wonderful, and I just thanked the Lord.
Jim was alive, but his heart still wasn't functioning properly.
They put him into a coma, a Medicaid coma, and to allow his body to heal. So I wasn't able to talk to him for days.
Jim spent the next 17 days in intensive care. He flatlined several more times, and each time, Jesus asked him a question.
The subsequent times that I arrested and would go towards the light, he would ask, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And each time I would ask to come back.
Jim woke up from his medical-induced coma. His heart increased in function from 5% to 30%. He no longer needed a heart transplant.
It was a long process, but basically it was good to hear his voice again. Very good to hear his voice again.
His doctor implanted a pacemaker in his chest. Just a couple of days later, Jim was able to make it home in time for his daughter's graduation. One doctor told Jim he only had a year to live. That was over 7 years ago.
It's brought us closer together, so much closer together. We talk about things now, and it's whatever needs to be done for the day, it's done. You know, we don't focus on things that are trivial.
Jim knows that every day he has with his family is a blessing from Jesus Christ.
I try to witness to at least one person a day, to let them know this isn't about me. It's about their life. And to know that He is there for them. And He loves them.
Some call them journals. Some call them diaries. Whatever we choose to call them, they are, for better or worse, a record of our lives. John Skipworth has chronicled his life well. His spiritual journey began at Vacation Bible School.
I understood that God had a son and that He died for me and that I could be forgiven of my sins.
John tried to grow in his new faith, but that didn't last long.
I believe everybody believed in God, but as far as a biblical type of belief that produces an action, I don't believe anyone in our household had that. I don't want to blame anybody, but I just didn't follow through, with what I had said at 12 years old.
John's parents had divorced when he was 2 years old. When his mother and stepfather divorced years later, John decided to live with his stepfather.
So at 16 years old, I became the designated driver. I drove my stepfather with a broken heart after my mom left him. He went deeper in the bottle, and I drove him every night of my life.
John had freedom at his stepfather's, freedom to do anything he wanted.
I went from, drinking beer at 15, 16 years old to at 17, I started smoking marijuana, started smoking pot, with guys out at parties, and then immediately ran into somebody that was doing cocaine. And 90 days later, I was an IV drug addict, sticking needles in my arm, shooting up drugs. I think it was an internal void in me looking for somewhere to belong.
John the addict soon became John the dealer.
I may be selling pot, but I was using as much methamphetamine in one day as I could make money selling pot in a week.
During one drug deal, things went bad very quickly. The sellers met John and the other buyers at a hotel room.
We were ready to expedite the deal. Let's get it over with, get the drugs bought, get them out of here before something really bad happens. One thing led to another, and a fight broke out. I ran over to a bed and grabbed a pillowcase off of a bed. And the fight, everybody's still fighting. I had been fighting, everybody's fighting, and they were trying to get out of the door. And I grabbed a guy. One guy, I didn't know him at the time. I grabbed him when he was trying to run out the door with a pillowcase, and I drug him back in the room. And when I drug him back in the room, my buddies immediately ran to the door, and we got the guy down in the floor of the hotel room and gave him a beating. That was pretty severe.
The young man, JP, was beaten until he was unconscious. John and his buddies panicked, and they wrapped up JP in a sheet and drove to the woods and left the body there. JP got up and started fighting again.
And so I hit him and knocked him down and got my friend free from him. And walking away, I looked at my friend and I said, just cut his throat. And before either of us knew what happened, both on drugs, both out of our mind, I'm standing there 10 foot from him, and all of a sudden blood just all up one side of me. And we were living in a make-believe, tough guy, drug, kind of a subconscious, blurry world that at that moment became very real.
The next morning, a pastor was working behind his church.
And he was setting up chairs next to that canal for sunrise service for Easter Sunday morning. And he heard JP gurgling and moaning, and he found JP. When he found JP with his throat cut, he notified the authorities. The authorities showed up, and when the friends were traveling, they saw all the emergency services, and they went and found out that was their friend. They saw the white bed sheet, and the authorities said, "Do you know him?" And they said, "Yeah, we know him." They said, "Where did this happen?" They said, "A fight happened at this hotel room." And 20 minutes later, Bossier City PD was at the door of our hotel room, and they arrested everybody in the room.
John went to jail for 73 days. His addiction and crimes escalated. He was in and out of jail for 4 years. After a high-speed chase in 2002, John got 20 years in prison because he was a third-strike felon.
I laid down on the floor, and I just was crying. I was broken, and I just started telling God how disappointed I was with myself, how disappointed I was with my life. And I was sorry for hurting my mom. I was sorry for hurting my dad. I was sorry for all the shame. I was sorry for hurting that guy in that hotel room. I was sorry for being a drug addict and a thief and a liar. And it seemed like just a few minutes. It seems just as real today. I just laid there. And I heard the click, 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 click of the electronic door. They said, "Church call." And I just remember getting up out of my cell, and I walked down there to church, and this little pastor, he came so faithfully. And he always opened the service, and he said, "Does anybody want to give a testimony?" And people would get up and say, "I'm going home," or "My mama got healed of cancer." And I walked up, and there's like 150, 200, rapists, murderers, thugs, gangbangers, killers. I walked up there, and I said, "I just want you to know that today I went to court and found out that I'm a habitual offender and that I'm going to receive a multi-bill, and I'll probably spend the rest of my life in prison for mistakes that I made." And I said, "But right up there in that jail cell a minute ago, God just saved me, and I'm going to live the rest of my life for God, even if I spend it in prison cleaning showers."
John was allowed to enroll in Overcomers Training Center, a halfway house. In 2003, the Overcomers group was allowed to go to church. While waiting for his ride back to prison, John recognized a familiar face.
I looked down the corridor there, and I saw a gentleman kind of limping, walking on a cane. And he was getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And the closer he got, I started being able to see a visible scar on his neck. And immediately I realized it was JP. And he walked up to me, and he stuck out his hand. And the weight of all of that responsibility just gripped me. It was on me. And it wasn't a time to be a tough guy. It wasn't. And I just broke down, started crying. He said, "Oh man, I forgive you, John. Oh, I love you. Man, I'm glad you're here. God's about to change your life. God's going to use you to do great things." And he grabbed me and he hugged me that night. He said, "I'm glad you're here." It was Easter Sunday. 5 years to the day that the pastor found him setting up for sunrise service on resurrection morning.
John later found out that JP's parents had been praying for him for years. After completing his time with Overcomers, the judge gave John 7 years instead of the 20 that he was expecting. John has been out of prison for 3 years now. He met Brooke at church in 2009, and they married 1 year later.
I know he had a past, but I've never seen him that way, and it's hard for me, even hearing his story a million times, it's hard for me to believe it because I just know who he is, after Christ.
Today, John is the pastor at Thibodaux First Assembly of God. He continues to write about his journey and how God continues to work in his life.
The largest thing that's changed in me is my identity, who I am, and who I am flows out of who I am in Christ. And slowly, year by year, more and more of that is beginning to come out of me.
I was very, very vengeful at that time, very unforgiving. I was going at my ex-husband and doing everything possible legally to avenge myself. I was born and brought up in India. I grew up as a Hindu, and Hinduism is all about idols and rituals and ceremonies. I believed in it all my life.
In 2000, Tina Wigg moved to America for a job. A year later, she met and married her husband.
He was brought up in a Sikh family, so it was an interreligion and multicultural marriage.
Her husband soon became abusive.
My culture taught me that marriages are to be kept, so I kept tolerating it for many, many years. I was very, very broken and very, very hurt, very angry with my husband.
But it wasn't until her life was threatened that she took out a restraining order against her husband.
I had the court given me child custody, and I got the house, and I got everything that from the world's perspective was a win. But inside, I was just dying. I went into deep depression at that point. I just wanted to end it all. During this time, my realtor came to visit me. As I told him about the situation, he told me that I need to forgive my husband. And he told me about Jesus and how he extends grace, and so we need to extend grace. And I said, he needs to seek my forgiveness instead of me going and forgiving him.
As an escape, Tina decided to take her 2 daughters on a short vacation to Disneyland. But the realtor wanted to meet before she left.
He sat me down in a conference room and he read to me about the armor of God. And he actually took 2 hours explaining every single verse in the armor of God and telling me how it's applicable in our lives. I was quite impressed by what he had told me. I thought if the Bible, if just a small passage is so intriguing, the book would be amazing. I need to read what the book has. I found a Bible app, and the best part was that it would read to me. So I got the Bible app and I started listening to it while driving to LA for 7 hours.
They reached their hotel and Tina put her kids to bed. Even though she'd been driving all day, she had a desire to keep reading the Bible.
I read till about 3 a.m. At some point I went off to sleep, and in the middle of my sleep, I felt as if I was just woken up. I don't know if it was I was awake or it was a dream. The roof of my hotel room was just lifted off, and there was this big light which came in my room. A hand which reached down on me, and that hand touched my forehead and said, "You are my daughter, and I will not let you die." I woke up and it was almost as if a backpack full of weight of things had been lifted off of me. I felt very, very light in my spirit, and I did not feel depression at all. So we went off to Disneyland, and every time I would see a long line, I would be so happy because that would give me 45 minutes of listening to the Bible. I would listen to it all day and then come back in the hotel room, listen to it in the night.
When Tina returned home from vacation, she decided to break her restraining order and meet her husband.
I had rehearsed a line all day, written it on my palm, that this is what I'm going to say. I knocked the door and he opened it, and I just froze. I couldn't say a word.
Tina and her husband sat down. Then, just like in her hotel room, God showed up.
There was a man sitting right in front of me by the fireplace, wearing a white, just bright white, shiny clothes, and he handed me a scroll and asked me to read it. On it was written a sin that I had done in my past which was wrong. I said, "I'm sorry that I did this." And as soon as I said I'm sorry, the sheet went blank, and there was another line appeared which was another sin, and this went on for 2 hours.
Her husband never saw the man in white, but Tina's repentance touched him deeply.
At the end of the 2 hours, this man who was sitting right in front of me, he said, "It's finished," and he left. Right then I felt as if everything in my past had been wiped off. It was a new start. I felt my heart had been cleansed. A physical change I felt in my spirit, in my body. I felt forgiveness for my husband from the bottom of my heart.
Over the months, Tina tried to reconcile with her husband, but he wanted nothing to do with Christianity and ultimately divorced her.
I have completely forgiven my husband, and I have forgiven him for everything that he has done. In fact, I want him to also experience God the way I have. My daughters and I all pray for him, for his life to be changed, for God to touch his life, and I really, really believe that one day it will. God has really strengthened me and made my walk very, very strong with him. He has blessed me in many, many ways. Both my daughters have accepted Christ, and my mom accepted Christ a year ago. My sister accepted Christ a few months ago. So I can see God moving in my family, and things things changing. You can be from a different culture, from a different religion, speak a different language, and in the most darkest of a part of your life, but God can still touch you, and God can still heal you. God can bring you out of that. I believe that for women out there who have gone through an abusive situation, that Jesus can really heal you. If you give it to Him, if you surrender, He can take that and make your life very beautiful.
Jennifer McGill was a shining star on the new Mickey Mouse Club. She had already won many pageants and talent competitions as a small child. Then at 11, she auditioned with thousands of other eager kids to be a Mouseketeer.
Our phone was in the kitchen, and so everybody could hear my mother's reaction wherever you were in the house. We were both jumping up and down and screaming, and I'm like, Mom, really? What does this mean? We didn't even know what it meant. We just knew I got the job. We didn't understand that it was going to be a whole life change, that we were going to move to Orlando, that this was going to be a job that really would last over 7 years.
Throughout those 7 years on the show, Jennifer performed with several budding stars, such as Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, and Ryan Gosling.
My favorite little guy was Justin. And I can call him little because, we're about 3 years apart, and when I met him, he was probably a foot shorter than I was. He was 13 and I was 16.
During high school and her last years on the show, Jennifer began to experience the cruel realities of show business.
Production had secretly asked me not to gain any more weight. And that really did traumatize me, both in the moment, but also over time. I couldn't let go of this idea that I wasn't as valuable because I didn't look like the other girls. And I started understanding that in this particular showbiz world, it didn't matter how well I sang, or maybe even how cute my face was. If my body did not measure up to this standard that all these other girls were meeting, I had a problem. And over the years, that did not go away.
Jennifer had been a Christian since she was 8 years old and never had her faith in God tested before.
When I was coming out of high school and going into college, I knew God loved me, and I journaled a lot about my hopes and dreams and how I had faith that God had things under control. But I wasn't recognizing the negativity in my life as lies. I thought it was true. Sometimes I'd hear from my manager, can you lose a size, or can you lose 20 pounds? And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm 21 and this is the smallest I've ever been. I just, at that point, thought that he was just the big God, and he had a lot of stuff going on, and maybe he wasn't working on this right now. Maybe I had to wait, or maybe it wasn't gonna happen. I had a lot of doubt.
That doubt and low self-esteem continued, but Jennifer still pursued a career as a recording artist. Producers rejected her, telling her she sounded too old or that she was too articulate.
It's just the craziest thing that you go get educated and you work on your craft, and then you're told that you're kind of too good at stuff to be a pop artist. I mean, what does that say about pop artists?
Jennifer found work in musical theater. She thrived on the live performances.
I was addicted to the attention of an audience. I was addicted to the attention of the world that I didn't know how to get. But then when we walked off the stage, I would just start questioning, well, was my dress, slimming enough? How did the other girls do? When I went home, my addiction switched to food and men. I craved male attention. I craved ice cream and chips. And I would yo-yo, both romantically and physically, and I just could not make myself happy. So if I couldn't do it in the public eye, I was gonna go out in my private life to the bars and become a rock star. So alcohol happened. And for the first time, when I drank, I felt more confident and I felt more relaxed, and then more and more giving myself away happened. And so it was really just me and the world for a time. And during my darkest times, when I was making all of my choices and really not listening to God at all, and not caring really what happened to me and thinking that I was dead inside, I met a man and he asked me to marry him, and I said yes just because he asked.
6 months later, she found out he was already married to another woman. Jennifer had the marriage annulled.
That was the wake-up call. I was embarrassed that I was so unhappy and so depressed, and I had married a married man, and I'm 30, and I settled, and I did it wrong. That was the moment, or the moments, where I realized I was a shell of Jennifer. And
all of the original purpose and reason why God made me started flooding back. It's like I could hear him calling to me again. And I think it's because I had let so much go. I think that I had just cleared so much and isolated myself to the point where all I could hear was him. And so I got down on my knees and I said, Lord, I've done everything wrong. I've chosen poorly. I have gotten myself into this mess. This is my fault. This is not anybody else's. My responsibility. I do not ever want to make a decision without you again. And I said, I give my heart back to you. And I'm not going to ask you for anything but to rescue me from this situation and put me into somewhere that I can heal, I can get closer to you, and I can have a job that glorifies you. I didn't ask to sing. I didn't ask for some sort of superstar, anything. I said, you know, I'll go anywhere and serve food or serve others however I need to, as long as you're in the center of my life. It was that simple.
After her decision, Jennifer knew it was time to make some other changes in her life.
Very quickly, I left where I was living. I moved to Orlando. I was among friends. I was with my dad. I mean, I was taken care of. And within a month, I had a job at a church and a job with Holy Land Experience. What I love about where God placed me right after I rededicated my heart to him is that I got to be in a familiar place I used to call the stage, and now I call the platform.
Swing, swing away. Today, Jennifer's platform is her new music. Her debut album is entitled Unbreakable.
This whole album is about restoration, about healing and power and strength through the love of God, and how you are not alone. He is with you on the battlefield spiritually. And if we can just tap into that and believe that and have that faith, you're on your way to an unbreakable life too with God.
Jennifer remarried in 2016. She and her husband Jeff live in Tennessee. Jennifer still loves to perform, and she loves to share what Jesus Christ did for her.
I don't think it was a mistake that my first love was singing. And I think that I distorted it, and I allowed the world to distort that dream for most, if not over half of my life. And Jesus gave my dreams back to me. Jesus brought the music back to my life, but I have my joy back too because of Jesus.
One of the hardest things as an atheist is that all of these values, why am I important? Why should people care about me? A lot of those things come from your own performance.
As the daughter of two atheists, Jordan Manji felt she had a lot to prove.
You have to understand, my family is very competitive. There's always been a high priority on being the best. So much of my identity was founded on I'm the smartest one in the room, right? I'm not the prettiest, I'm not the most athletic, right? I'm the smartest.
At 11 years old, Jordan decided there was no God and began openly challenging her Christian classmates.
I would bring the Bible to school with Post-it notes where all the contradictions were, and then I would say, tell me why this isn't a contradiction. And they couldn't really do it.
But in high school, Jordan started to see a contradiction in her own beliefs. She considered herself a good person, but that raised a question she couldn't answer. Where does morality come from, if not from God?
Why is something right or wrong? Why do I believe in human rights? I don't believe in a God, so where are these things coming from? I had gone and asked all of these other people, and nobody had a good answer. I had this kind of epiphany where I said, I'm gonna wait until college to explore those questions so that I can get into a good school. And that worked out pretty well, because I got into Harvard.
There, she quickly discovered she was no longer at the top of the class.
Now being surrounded by people with whom I'm no longer the smartest person in the room 95% of the time, it destroys that sense of identity and of worth, and it makes you wonder, who really am I and what makes me valuable?
As Jordan began to question her worth, she became friends with Joseph Porter, a Christian conservative who gave her even more questions to think about.
It really started pressing me on, where does your morality come from? Why do you believe in it? You're just saying it kind of emerges from nowhere. I started seeing maybe there are these cracks in my own intellectual framework.
Jordan enrolled into a meta-ethics class, hoping to find answers that would strengthen her argument. Instead, she was assigned a short reading assignment, an essay by C.S. Lewis.
Essentially what C.S. Lewis says is God is goodness. God is the good, and our lives are good when we strive to imitate God. It was mind-blowing.
Jordan wanted to explore this idea further, so she decided to read the Bible again. This time she would try to understand it, not critique it. And when she read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, she was struck by what he said about what it means to be good.
As an atheist, I was living life better, according to a Christian ethic, than a lot of Christians were. Like, I wasn't sleeping around, I wasn't doing drugs, I wasn't drinking, I was a good student. And so it was very easy for me to think of myself as a good person. And it was only when I went back to the words of Jesus and I saw, no, you're an angry person. You may not be sleeping around, but you experience lust. You are very arrogant. You think too highly of yourself. Seeing those things made me realize that I wasn't really a good person. Maybe there's some truth here that I haven't figured out yet. Maybe I don't know the best way to run my life.
Jordan kept reading until she came to John 19.
I had finally made it to the crucifixion scene. And as I was reading it, I had this moment where I just said, no, Aslan, no.
For years, Jordan believed C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was just a story. But now as she read of Jesus' crucifixion, she realized her favorite tale from Narnia was more than a work of fiction. Aslan, the great lion of Lewis's story, was Jesus. And she was just like Edmund, arrogant, but redeemed.
It just immediately clicked, like, I am Edmund, Jesus is Aslan, and he is dying for my sake. Seeing it now with me in the story was just a totally radically new way of looking at it, and realizing kind of my own sinfulness in that moment and my own need for healing from that sin made all the difference in how I read it. And so I started just crying, really thinking about Aslan, but thinking about Jesus through that process. Realizing in that moment that you're Edmund is to realize I'm powerless. I need help. I recognized my own incurable need for forgiveness that could only come from Jesus Christ.
Still, that wasn't enough to break Jordan's deeply rooted need for intellectual evidence of God. So she pored over every scientific argument, analyzed every prominent religion, and all the evidence pointed her back to Jesus Christ.
One of the things that helped me the most to eliminate my pride was having to admit that I had been wrong all of those years as an atheist.
Ultimately, it came down to a profound yet simple truth.
As I thought about what love really was, I could see how Jesus' death on the cross was the perfect embodiment of that. God is love and God is truth, so God is goodness. It was at that point when I realized, if I want to try this Christianity business, I can't do it half-heartedly. I have to be fully committed.
On April 12, 2009, Jordan gave her life to Jesus. Since then, she has grown even stronger in her faith. She graduated from Harvard in 2012, recently married, and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree at Fuller Theological Seminary. But she says none of that determines her value.
What is man that God is mindful of him? What am I that I have value? So long, my value had come from the things that I had done. So moving to a framework where instead, the reason I knew I was valuable was because Christ had died for me, that he loved me regardless of what I would ever do. It's immensely freeing.
When Ethan was born, he was just completely different than our first child.
He would have moments of okay calmness during the day, but at night it was really bad.
Brian and Gina Walden always dreamed of having a family. Their first son, Devin, was a breeze. Their second son, Ethan, was more of a challenge.
It was really bad. He was very, if he fell asleep for 20 minutes, then he'd wake up screaming, and then we'd end up in a chair rocking him, and as soon as we fell asleep, he kind of quieted down, and as soon as we stopped rocking, he would wake up again screaming.
I would try to get his attention and he wouldn't look at me. And I would tickle him, I would smile at him, and I'd bring out the toys, and I would do anything to get him to respond, and he wouldn't.
As Ethan got older, Gina and Brian worried something could be wrong.
He was not able to tell me what was going on. Instead of being able to communicate with me and tell me he was having a hard time or that he didn't feel well, he would just cry, and then he would bite himself. He'd bite himself until he would bleed.
The doctor referred them to a specialist who gave them the news they dreaded.
He said, "I'm sorry to tell you that looks like your son might have autism."
And having the doctor tell me that he had autism was like a kick in the stomach.
It's like the doctor handed us a sign, and here's your sign. This is what you guys are gonna have to deal with for the rest of your life.
One doctor told the Waldens Ethan would probably never speak. So with little help or direction, they began to care for their son. But raising Ethan was exhausting and stressful, and that strained their marriage.
So there's a lot more arguments, a lot more disagreements. I have my thoughts about what we should do. She has her thoughts about what we should do.
Then one night they realized they were up against something more. Gina says she had a vision of a dark presence in her son's room. She woke up in a panic.
I remember getting up, I ran down my hallway, and I ran into Ethan's room, and I just fell on the floor, and I just cried. I cried my eyes out.
I pick her up off the floor and we start talking, and something went off in my mind at that moment and in her mind that said, this fight is as much a spiritual battle as it is a physical battle.
They realized only their faith in God could help them face the challenges of raising their son.
So the next morning I got up and printed out a bunch of Bible verses. I started getting up earlier and praying and seeking God, and then Gina started doing the same thing.
Soon after that, they found an autism specialist, Janelle Esplin.
Looking at Ethan then, he looked like he would be a student that would progress very slowly.
Janelle was also a Christian, and like the Waldens, believed prayer was just as important as therapy. She prayed with the Waldens daily.
We could see that everything we were doing was working, and that he wasn't becoming stagnant, and it didn't look like he was going to become stagnant anytime soon.
Soon, Ethan was making eye contact. He was responsive and seemed to recognize his parents. He still wasn't talking, but that changed one day.
I remember his first word, it was go. And so I would want to hear it all the time because I knew that once we got one word coming out of his mouth, that more was going to come and he was going to learn.
For a while, he would just repeat what he heard. His big brother, Devin, helped him practice by teaching him to pray.
I got him to say, "Dear Jesus, thank you for my parents, bless them, and in the name of Jesus, amen."
Then finally,
we talked. We had our first conversation, and he told me what his favorite color was, and he told me that he loved me. All the things that I had just dreamed of hearing, God was releasing, and it was coming out of his mouth.
He progressed so rapidly that by the time he was 5, he was in a standard kindergarten class.
The only reaction is that God did the miraculous in Ethan's life. God was faithful to them, and that Gina and Brian did everything that they could for their son.
Now he's 9 years old and tested in the 99th percentile statewide. He recently won the California Young Scholars Award.
I like hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my mom.
One of his favorite things to do is wrestle with his dad.
Devin joins in and beats me up. My dad goes easy on me because he's really strong.
Today, the Waldens relish the family times they always longed for. Their book, A Brand New Day, shares their journey. More than anything, they say they believe that Ethan's story is a message to those who go through difficult times.
Hang on to God's promises because they're true, and He's faithful, and He's amazing. He's going to use whatever you go through to help someone else and to bring glory to His name.
I was born in Iran. I was a very thoughtful, serious child, and I grew up believing that all faiths were more or less the same. It was a man-made thing, it answered our needs, and I just wasn't one of those people who needed it. I adored my dad. I felt my dad really felt the same about me. But at the same time, my dad was a very busy man. He wasn't home very often. I knew he loved me. There was never a doubt in my mind. But I wasn't quite sure that I was enough. And so I learned to strive, to be lovable. By the time I was a teenager, there was a profound sense of loneliness that has settled in my heart. Because of my parents' divorce, my mom, my sister, and I went to England. My father remained in Iran. Our communication was very limited. With the revolution and everything, it almost became impossible. I couldn't go back. And so the world came between us, but my heart didn't fully understand that, didn't grasp that. What I grasped was, my daddy is not here. If my daddy wanted to be here, he would make a way. So I lost my family. I lost my home. I lost my language. I made this vow that I myself would never divorce because I saw the price of it in my heart. I started attending a boarding school for young ladies. We had to attend church. They told those of us who were from a different faith background we could sit on the balcony and we could read our own faith books. And I used to sneak romance novels under my uniform, the Harlequin romance level, but also more literary kind, like the Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte's. That ultimate story about a person who's rejected from childhood for no fault of her own, and someone admired by everybody else, someone recognized as mighty and good, finally looks at her and sees her worth. That was the story my heart was hungry for. It was all responding to this need, to this core need for someone to see me exactly as I was and still love me and absolutely and utterly find me worthy. Worthy of pursuit, worthy of love. I met a young man and we fell in love. Some 21-year-olds are quite mature. That wasn't us. Within a few years, you could see the cracks in our maturity reflected in our marriage. When that marriage essentially ended, I came into a very dark place. My formula for life proved faulty. If I was good enough, if I was smart enough, if I worked hard enough, if I was enough, that then I could be happy. And that hadn't worked. I had a dream about Jesus one night. And what's really amazing about that dream is the only time I went to church really was those years when I was in boarding school. I never heard the gospel. I never read the Bible. But this is the thing. I knew he was the Son of God. I knew it absolutely. And when he came closer, I looked into his eyes. And in those eyes, I saw something I will never see in this world. The measure of love that put him on the cross and the depth of power that made the stars. They shone through those eyes, and I almost fell on my knees because I couldn't stand anymore. And he just went like this to me, and I knew what he meant was, follow me. And he wasn't just saying, follow me a few steps. He was saying, follow me. And I would have done anything. I woke up from the dream, not a Christian. I still didn't really know what the gospel was. Jesus himself hadn't told me the gospel. But I woke up with an unshakable peace. Very quickly after that, the Lord surrounded me with Christians. They all invited me to church. They invited me to Bible study. And for the first time in my life, I began to hear the gospel, read the Bible, and I thought, what's all this? Give me a list of do's and don'ts that will fix my life. That's what I was looking for. So I didn't fully understand, but the people around me, I understood. They were different. There was an old priest, and he came to me and he said, when are you going to come to Christ, Tessa? All the thoughts in my head were some kind of answer to just swat away that question. So I opened my mouth to do that very thing. And do you know what came out of my mouth? What came out of my mouth was, I already do. And as the words came out of my mouth, I realized, I do believe. He asked me to follow him himself, and I do, with all my heart. God, he is someone greater than other men. He is the King of Kings. He pursues us. He was the one who saw me, this faulty, average, fallen young girl, and he set his affections on me. My worth isn't in what I do. My worth is that Jesus calls me his beloved.